Good evening. I have just one question. If there are some seats still available, maybe we can let other people come in, because we saw a couple of empty seats. Maybe. No empty seats. Okay.
Yeah, but Tariq said that people could also sit on the stage, right?
Yeah, I don't want the stage to collapse, but it's violating the fire regulations, and this is the global bureaucracy. It always talks like that. But it's sad when people can't get in because there's no room, so I don't know if they can be allowed to come in and stand on the side. That is not going to collapse, no? Okay.
Okay, so good evening, and okay, some people are coming inside actually, and thank you all for coming here. So we have a new season of the Philosophical Theater, and it is really a great pleasure to introduce our first guest in this season, Tariq Ali. Tariq is well known to the Serbian audience, but I will still, of course, tell a couple of things about him. Born in Pakistan, lives in London, a philosopher, writer, journalist, filmmaker, political activist, one of the editors of the New Left review. He has published more than 30 books. Some of them are Bush and Babylon, Clash of Fundamentalisms, The Obama Syndrome. His most recent book, very interesting book, The Extreme Center, A Warning. And also a couple of days ago, he finished his new book called The Dilemmas of Lenin, and he will be talking about it tonight also. He also had a premiere at the beginning of this year at the Croatian National Theater, also as a part of the project of the Philosophical Theater. His new adventures of Don Quixote, that was before that performed in Germany. And he is well known to the Serbian audience for his novels from the Islam Quintet. All the books have been published in Serbian, and we hope the rest of his political essays will also be published very soon. Of course, we have tonight with us, as always, Srećko Horvat, the founder of the Philosophical Theater. You know him all, Croatian philosopher, the co-founder of DM25, and he will be leading this conversation with Tariq tonight. So an applause together with me. Yes, together with me. Okay, so a big warm applause for Tariq.
That's it?
That's it.
Okay.
Can I, before you start, can I make a request? This light is very alienating. If there's any way I could see more of the audience, it would be helpful. If we can do it, just dim it a bit on us and get more on the audience.
Yeah, so...
Because it's shining, really hurting one's eyes.
Now it was the opposite, they put even more on, I think.
Is that a fire?
Ako možete samo staviti malo više svetla na publiku. Čisto da razumijem. Odlično. It's better?
That's much better.
It's much better,
Thank
yeah.
you.
Jer ovo prije izgledalo kao neko ispitivanje, kod KGB u podrumu, a već su nas prozvali levičari u podrumu, tako da... So yeah, let's start. We were yesterday, we had a big event in Zagreb at the Croatian National Theater, and actually I think that some of the topics we were mentioning there and discussing are also relevant for Serbia. So I would start immediately by that. It's not your first time in Serbia, it's not your first time in Croatia. You have been many times to Croatia, Serbia, Bosnia, but also Yugoslavia at that time. New Left Review was very active also during the war, but also when the bombing of Serbia started. And you have been a harsh critic of the Balkan elites. So how does the situation to you look like today? For instance, in Belgrade we have a new developing project which is called Belgrade on the Waterfront. In Croatia we have the worst kind of historical revisionism today. which is similar to what is happening in Hungary and Poland. We have the ongoing transition period, which is never ending, with new privatizations, mass employment. Is this something specific for this region? And maybe could you tell us how does it look like from a historical perspective?
From a historical perspective, it really looks like a total disaster. I have to be honest. You know, I don't idealize the former Yugoslavia. Many mistakes were made, but there were many good things too, which we shouldn't forget. For us, in the New Left, one of the finest groups of people in the former Yugoslavia were the group of intellectuals grouped around the magazine Praxis. From all over the former Yugoslavia, we used to organize the conferences in Korčula, where there were very open, free and frank discussions that took place, not just about the rest of the world, but also about Yugoslavia. And critical conferences. What happened to workers' self-management? Was it working, not working? And they were, to be honest with you, they were very important for my generation because we were constantly looking for models of socialism that were not completely oppressive, like the Stalinist model of the Soviet Union in the 30s and 40s and early 50s, particularly. So that Yugoslavia we miss, and this was a Yugoslavia which was known all over the world because of the non-aligned movement. So there were Yugoslavs going to Africa, to Asia, to other parts of the world, working as engineers, as doctors, and it was a nice time like that because a country like this could be projected onto the world stage. And so I can't go on too long about that, though I would like to, because they are very important memories. Today, once again, I always get a shock when you have to travel from Zagreb to Belgrade and show your passports. There are nice sites too that I have my books published sometimes 4 times, sometimes 5 times in the same language. That's also nice for me personally, but not generally. But today's world in which we live is a world which is very prominent here, also prominent in other parts of Europe. So don't think that this is specific to the former Yugoslavia or the Balkans in general, which is that you have effectively a situation where money, big money, and capital dominates politics so completely that any talk of democracy seems like a bit of a joke. When you have parties of the center left or the center right fighting with each other over elections, but when they come to power, they do the same thing. When you have politicians in all the former constituent republics of Yugoslavia who dress in the same way, who talk in the same way, whose political language is exactly the same, and who sometimes even deal with the same people handing out the money. And then one has to say, well, what has changed for the better? And in my opinion, not very much. And a culture today which is like, again, other parts of the world, which is dominated largely by big money, where ideas are depreciating every day, where privatizations are taking place, where there are large numbers of people who are out of work. A factory closes in a small town, which has 2 or 3 factories, one factory closes and half the population or 1/3 of the population is out of work. If you look at Bosnia, which used to be a very wonderful part of the former Yugoslavia, it's a depressing country today. both its government and its opposition. You look at Montenegro, where the same guy has been in power for a long, long time, one day playing games with the Russians, the other day with the Americans, one day doing this, the second day offering to join NATO. It's not good, whichever way you look at it. This can't be healthy for the population. And then you have what Srećko said, described as historical revisionism, that slowly the historical memory of many people is not being wiped out with technology or with torture, but by the way in which society is organized. So the Second World War is a misty business now. There's a mist over it. And was the partisan resistance to the Third Reich, Nazi Germany, a good thing or a bad thing? Well, for me, it was a very good thing. And the resistance in this part of Europe, Yugoslavia, was very strong and powerful. The strongest resistance movement existed in Yugoslavia, stronger than any other European resistance movement. And because of the strength of that resistance movement, the Yugoslav resistance produced a set of leaders, not just Tito, others as well, who didn't have to bow down or go on their knees before Stalin. They could defy him, and they did, in a very good and strong way, which again had a big impact. So that Titoism became a big heresy in the old communist movement. And today when you hear of people who fought with the Third Reich, or whose grandfathers, political grandfathers, not genetic grandfathers, political grandfathers fought on the same side as the Third Reich, being hero worshipped again, streets being named after them, you really begin to wonder what world we're living in today. But as I say, this is the way the world functions now. You know, you have one block in the center, which I've referred to as the extreme center. It doesn't matter who's in power, and they determine, they rule, and they exercise on part of their local oligarchies the dictatorship of capital. That is what Europe is beginning to look like, what the United States has looked like for some time, and we have it here too.
So you wrote your book, The Extreme Center, a Warning, in 2015, but it was a situation when we had some kind of an optimistic uprising of movements like Syriza and Podemos. So in a way, and at the end of the book, you're giving this optimistic view of maybe a new Europe. But today, as time passed by, and we know what happened with Greece and with Syriza also, and with the whole situation of Europe and Brexit also, can you tell us what do you think about the whole situation today, and how would you, in a way, end your book if it was now?
Well, I wrote that book in 2015, as you said, and at that time one had a lot of hope that things would turn out differently. Syriza in Greece, Podemos in Spain, what were they asking for? Let's discuss that for just 2 minutes. They were asking for a tiny bit of social democracy. That's all, not too much, a tiny bit, like Jeremy Corbyn is in Britain today, saying we have to give people homes, we have to take back some of the privatizations, we have to make sure that the basic necessities of life, like health, like education, like water, are not governed by the rules of private capitalism and motivated by profit, because these are things that everyone needs. This was the common sense of Europe after the Second World War. And that went in the late 90s. And before 2008, There was such a euphoria, such excitement. We were in a new world. We were going to transform it. Everyone would be rich, etc., etc., etc. That collapsed with the Wall Street crash of 2008, as we saw. Greece collapsed, Spain collapsed, the Italian economy suffered, Ireland was in a complete mess, Portugal collapsed. So if the European Union leadership, by which I largely mean the Germans, had been intelligent, they would have used that crisis to make big transformations, both in the way in which Europe was governed and in the way that capitalism needed reforms. It needed to be reformed. Not what they call reforms, which is privatization, but real, genuine social reforms. They didn't do it. As a result, the system hasn't got better. It's just been, they've put sticking plaster on the wounds, but the sticking plaster, when you look at it, you can see the blood already underneath. So we hope that these new movements would do the trick. And in Greece, you know, over a period of 2 years, there were 25 or 26 general strikes. That was the big movement that brought Syriza to power. The referendum in Greece wanted Syriza not to accept the conditions being put to them by the bullies in the European Union. And Tsipras, instead of using the referendum, which had strengthened him enormously, capitulated completely. And I'll tell you the other thing. The reason for punishing Greece was not that there wasn't the money, because the money the Greeks needed was a trifle compared to the money which is spent by the European Union. It was the example. They wanted to punish the example of a small country which said, this is what we want, and the people voted for it. And they said, and sometimes their ideologues wrote it quite openly in The Economist and the Financial Times, that if you let Greece do it, other small countries will demand the same. So how can you refuse them then? So the Greek example had to be crushed, struck down. It still could have resisted, in my opinion, if it had had a proper plan. It didn't, and then Tsipras capitulated. And the result of this will be that the right will be back in power in Greece at the next election. Tsipras's ratings have gone right down. And this is the situation of the center-left in most parts, most parts of Europe. François Hollande is on 4%. That's the level of the popular support for Hollande in France. 4%. Because people have seen through this entire business. So yes, our optimism was slightly misplaced. In Spain, the game isn't over, by the way. Podemos didn't win the elections, but I never expected it to. It would have been, you know, they were wrong to think they could win them quickly within the space of a few years. But the situation in Spain is very critical at the moment. And with the Socialist Party now officially letting in Rajoy again as Prime Minister, one of the most corrupt politicians in Spain, there will be repercussions within their own base and within Spain as a whole. So it's not completely over. But I think the main thing to understand is that the demands are very modest and very limited. And even these demands are not being accepted. And if they carry on like this, there's going to be huge explosions, not necessarily on the side of the left, but in the vacuum that exists from the right and far right, which we are seeing already happening in Germany, where the extreme right parties are growing quite rapidly. So that is the problem we confront, but you know, we live and we learn.
You mentioned the problem, and I think it's a big problem here in our region as well, the problem of social democracy. So if we would imagine a situation that it's 68 and we are sitting in this room and we are speaking as Tsipras and others who just want to prevent new privatizations and so on, probably the true 68ers would come into the room and put a bomb and say this is not revolutionary at all. And because we know that social democracy was a historic compromise between work and labor in order to prevent the workers to go into the direction of the October Revolution and so on. And what we can see also precisely in Croatia, for instance, I think it's important to mention it here in Serbia, is that it's precisely the social democrats who were not social at all, who were not democrat at all, and who opened the door for mass privatizations, for the rise of xenophobia, racism, and so on. But my question is, you mentioned that Corbyn, actually, what they are trying to do is also, in a way, social democracy. And if we look at the left in the world today, not only Europe, is that actually what they try to do is just to preserve some battles that were won, or they were won through a compromise, and not offering anything further. So is this a complete lack of political imagination, or do you see, you know, some kind of new prospects in, I don't know, cooperatives or rebel cities such as Barcelona, or something which we had in Latin America, like participatory budgeting? Is this a kind of answer? And how can the left, you know, come over this problem that actually what they want to do is nothing radical per se?
Well, I think we are basically still living through the huge defeat that was inflicted by capital in 91. The collapse of the Soviet Union, the total failure of that leadership to reform the system, to improve it, or even to do what the Chinese have done, by the way. They couldn't do it. And those of us who were very critical of the Soviet Union, of course, understood why. But here you have to understand that the consciousness of small groups of intellectuals or members of left groups is not the same as mass consciousness. For millions and millions of people all over the world, in Africa, in South America, in Asia, the collapse of the Soviet Union was seen as a collapse of socialism, without any doubt. And they said, oh God, the one hope we had, we might get a better society, is gone. It's no good attacking them. That's how they grew up, that's the world they lived in, and that's how they saw it. And they felt that now, in the next century, and in the 10 years leading to the 21st century, there were no alternatives. And if there are no alternatives and people don't see any alternatives, they become apathetic, they become cynical, they become more individualistic. They say now it's each for himself or herself. No one is going to help us any longer. And this is something that happened globally. And the first big shift from this was in Latin America in 1999 with Venezuela. And then for the next 10 years, the Bolivarians in South America attempted to change and shift the thing back, not in the old way of confronting capitalism frontally and destroying it altogether, but in introducing what we can call structural reforms to strengthen their old base, poor peasants, workers, new base by building free housing, giving free medicine, the usual things. And they did build this base, and this base hasn't disappeared, but with the collapse of the oil prices, they are now suffering too. That they were heavily dependent on oil to fund all this. And I was very involved in all that campaign, and I remember talking to Hugo Chavez many times about this, and he said, we can't operate like the 20th century. I am in favor of uniting this region as much as we can, learning from each other, and if Venezuela has money, it can be used by other people to do similar things, provided it's used for good things. But it was essentially a left social democratic experiment with mass support and with social movements at the base of it. And this now seems to have entered its final lifespan. It seems like that. We will see, but I'm not optimistic. what the Americans pushed through in Brazil, the coup against Dilma, just a total scandal, a total and complete scandal, has been accepted in the Western media totally. Yeah, she was not corrupt personally, they admit that, but we got rid of her because the system was corrupt. But you are part of the system. Most of the people who organized the coup against Dilma are totally corrupt themselves and were facing charges of corruption. So it's a very complex world. And in a world in which such a huge defeat have been inflicted, anything, even the smallest progressive thing that happens, we have to support it and push it forward, even though it's not very revolutionary. But it creates more space for debate, for discussion, for taking people forward. If you say what is really, what do we need? I can say very openly to you, we need a revolution to get rid of these systems. We're not going to get that revolution. At the moment, in 25, 30 years' time, I don't know. But at the moment, we're not going to get it, so you have to cling to what there is, and without any illusions, without pretending that it is something which it isn't, push it forward, support it.
So now when you're talking about this period where we cannot ask for a real revolution, like to completely change the system, can you tell me what was your position? Because of course we had lots of leftists that were for the Remain Brexit campaign, and you were the ones that was for pro Remain of Britain and the European Union, and you were pro-Brexit. Can you tell me, because at one point you found yourself in a way at the same side as some right-wingers in Britain, and of course the situation is completely different, and what is now as Brexit is a reality, and we have a new situation now in Europe. Can you tell me what you think about it at this moment?
Yeah, let's first just discuss what you said, that in voting for Britain to leave the European Union, we were on the same side as people of the right. That's true. So were the Greeks when they voted no to the referendum. I mean, the far right in Greece was solidly for voting no, sometimes even more effectively than the left. So these things happen. We can't determine our politics on the basis of who is on this side or not. And you know, one could say that the people who were voting Remain was the City of London, the entire bourgeois establishment of the country, and half of the Conservative Party. They led the campaign for Remain. The Labour Party didn't fight the same campaign as the Conservatives. Jeremy Corbyn was punished for this in the media, but he fought an independent campaign for staying in, saying that we are very critical of the European Union, but we'll go in and fight, which is a decent position. I don't agree with it because I think it's totally utopian, but nonetheless it's an understandable position. The question of which way to vote for me was not a huge strategic question, because whichever way you voted, at the end of the day, capitalism was still there. Whichever way you voted, that was not going to change. The question was, would the vote deliver enough of a kick in the backside of the European Union to make them sit up and think again of some of the mistakes that they had made and thus open up new space? And for me, I voted that way because of Greece, I have to be honest, because of what they made Greece suffer. I could never vote for a body that did that to Greece. I just couldn't do it. Politically, emotionally, I had many, many friends in Greece. I just couldn't do it. So that was my particular reason for voting against, but I respected many people who abstained, who said, Tariq, we shouldn't vote. I said, fine, don't vote. So it was not a huge question of principle or strategy, but in the country as a whole, I mean, 17 million people voted against. That's the largest vote in British electoral history against something. There's never been such a huge vote. And there were mixed reasons. For some, like the extreme right, it was there are too many immigrants. And when they talked about immigrants, they didn't mean people with dark skins, they meant Eastern Europeans, Poles, Romanians, of which there are very few anyway. That was it. It was the free movement of labor. Why? Because they were told that this free movement of labor, all that it is doing is bringing in workers who work cheaply and get jobs which our people can't get, because unscrupulous gangsters, firms, companies bring them in to use against us. Now, I was asked this at a meeting, and I said, well, this is true. You can't deny that this happens. But the demand to put in that place is that all workers who come to work in Britain have the same trade union rights and minimum wage rights as any other worker in the country. That's what you fight for, not for kicking people out. For kicking people out or not letting people in isn't going to improve your situation immediately. And the small group of intellectuals and trade unionists on the left who did vote this position got some response for it, actually. And if you read all the interviews that have been done all over the country, because the British establishment was traumatized, what happened in large parts of the country, it was mainly that people felt their lives were shit, that there was nothing they could do. This was a basis of giving the government a kick, and kick it really hard, and that's what they did. And we will see now. I mean, you know, the world hasn't collapsed, neither the EU has collapsed, nor has Britain collapsed because of Brexit, and many people got very emotional about it, without knowing anything. I saw young people interviewed on television who were asked by, you know, BBC people who were pro-Remain, 90% of them, why are you crying? And she said, because something bad has happened. What does Europe mean to you? What has Europe given you? And the reply would be on primetime television, Europe gave us the National Health Service. This was something built by a radical Labour government in 1945. So it's that Europe became an emotional issue. And for some people, a question of identity. And it's this same empathy and emotion, which is not always a good thing, actually, because you can't understand. You know, Spinoza once said, don't laugh or cry, try and understand. And it's a good phrase for our times from this wonderful philosopher of the 17th century. But people got, I remember very well what happened when Princess Diana died. The same response. People who didn't know her, people pouring out onto the streets and crying, people claiming that her death was the demonstrations were anti-monarchist. I said, when 100,000 people gather in Hyde Park in London and sing God Save the Queen, it doesn't sound like anti-monarchism to me. Slightly different. So this is the situation we confront, but you know, coming to serious things now, the European Union either has to change or it will collapse, in my opinion. It can't exist like this anymore, where you effectively have an undemocratic structure dominated by the German elite. The French are very weak now, and they are more turning towards the Atlantic, dominated by the German elite, which makes all the policies, the main policies. And then these jokers come onto the screen and imagine that there's something like Juncker from the Duchy of Luxembourg, who, as Prime Minister of that country, was totally corrupt, made Luxembourg into a tax haven where laundered money went, or Dijsselbloem, a stupid guy from Holland who tries to be even tougher than the Germans when actually all he's doing is being a valet, a servant for Schäuble. Because everyone knows who dominates it. Now, I am in favor of a total transformation and a democratization of, I am totally for Europe. I'm not for the European Union. And I never have been as such for this particular European Union, ever since it decided to go on the road in which it is, a neoliberal road. That's the problem. People are beginning, meeting to discuss possibilities, solutions. But, you know, it's a long way from the reality that exists and what many good people want to do with it.
So this raises another question. We have Srećko here, who is one of the co-founders of DM25, and in a way DM is trying to democratize Europe in a way, and believes in the remaining of this kind of Europe we have today, but of course with a lot of changes that have to happen for it to stay together. And you were, of course, during your pro-Brexit speeches talking about this European Union that has to become a completely another type of European Union, but before that it has to dismantle, we have to dismantle this one. So maybe the two of you can say what you think can be the future of the European Union, an utopian one. You can tell your utopian visions of a future Europe, of course, not European Union, because...
Well, I have to say that the mic doesn't work, but I speak loudly enough.
It doesn't work.
It just stopped, or it didn't.
Maybe you just...
Maybe I can just talk without the mic. Yeah?
Or maybe I can give
maybe
I
you
don't
can.
know about the translators.
No, you
If they
have
can
to
hear
have the
me.
mic.
Yeah, I'll take this one.
Can we have another one here, please? Because I know we have...
Or it just switched off and I'm an idiot. I don't know. I'm not. I have to say that, as Tariq knows, I completely agree with Tariq's analysis and critique of the European Union. But I don't necessarily agree with the solution. As you know, DM was for the Remain vote in Britain, because, as you said, and that's very interesting, we also think and thought and still think that whatever the vote was and whatever the vote is, capitalism is here to stay. So it looked like a joke when the Daily Sun published this cover on the day of Brexit with the cover of a movie which was called Independence Day. But I think also it's utopian to think the Lexit position, in my view, is also to a certain degree utopian to think that Independence Day is possible, that it's possible to be outside. Well, it might be possible if there was an international movement. I mean, that's DM's function, that I think that this position that a country could exit could only be possible if this country already, on the, let's say, internal politics, has a strong left, and which is opposed to the domestic oligarchy and to the extreme right or to the extreme center. And when it comes to geopolitics, to foreign politics, and to the broader picture on the European level, it could be only possible if there is an international movement, because otherwise it will be smashed. So when you say that you thought that Europe would be kicked by Brexit, well, I think that might sound utopian as well, because, as you said, nothing changed. I mean, we will see what will happen with Article 50. But what I can see is also before, I remember you had a debate with Yanis before Brexit, where you said that you expect that the Tories will split, which is precisely what didn't happen. I think the Tories are even stronger than they were before. And my problem with the Lexit position is that, you know, it's not us who will use this, it's them who will use it. How do you see this? I mean, what's your stance on the perspective of internationalism in this view?
Well, I mean, look, the reason you have the growth of big right-wing nationalist currents in Europe is not due to Brexit. They've been growing for the last 10 years. So I could say to you that one reason they're growing is precisely because of what the European Union is and what the European Union does. And Otherwise, you can't explain what is happening in Europe. Every single country now has a huge extreme right movement. Long, long before people even dreamt there was going to be a referendum in Britain. There were referendums on the Constitution on Maastricht in France, which was almost 50-50. Likewise in Holland, likewise in Ireland. So Brexit is the only one with a huge majority for coming out, because it comes quite late after that. There have been huge problems within Europe before that. And the basic reason is, and this is where Varoufakis's position is very weak, because the only thing he can conceive of is changing the European Union when you have progressive governments in all the major European countries. Well, that really is utopian. To imagine that in Europe you will have progressive governments, and then these progressive governments will agree and come together and change the European Union. That is just not going to happen. There are no other movements from below at the moment in most countries in Europe. So internationalism for both sides is an abstraction. In Britain, the other thing, which some of Jeremy Corbyn's supporters while voting Remain nonetheless said, was that if we ever come to power and we want to renationalize the railways, and we want to think about taking the public utilities, electricity, gas, etc., at a later stage back into public ownership, all the laws being promulgated by the European Union today will not let us. And so the question of sovereignty of a national parliament to push through laws which are not accepted by the European Union is extremely important. And if that were to happen, if that had happened, you would have had an even larger majority for quitting. I mean, basically, the European Union has been in trouble for some time. And I think one of the problems in Greece, which affected the whole leadership, not just Tsipras but also Varoufakis, is that they did not have a plan B to deal with what the Europeans were demanding.
Well, I'm sorry, that's not true.
Okay, no.
Yanis had a plan, but it was Tsipras who didn't give him the chance
then he
to
should,
implement
the minute
the
that
plan.
happened, he should have resigned.
Well, he resigned the day after the referendum.
No, he resigned the day after the referendum because Tsipras totally capitulated. But this business was going on for a long time before. And the plan had to think in serious terms of not walking out of the European Union. No one was suggesting that, but of quitting the Eurozone.
But Tariq, that was precisely the plan, not to get out of the European Union, but to develop an alternative currency.
Well, maybe you're closer to him than I am, and you know more.
I don't want to be in the position to defend him now, but well, that's the fact.
No, he said similar things to me, Srećko. But you know, it's dark. The sun has gone down, and we can say whatever. I'll tell you what he said to me after the Guardian debate, after we were arguing about Brexit. He came and whispered in my ear, so you know, and I'm saying it publicly. He came and said, Tariq, I agree with 90% of what you're saying, and believe me, if Britain votes Brexit, I won't wake up in that morning and shed tears. Fine, but that is politicians' talk. And if you want to develop an alternative to this European Union, you have to do some things, which I've stressed time and time again. You have to prepare a draft alternative constitution of what sort of Europe you want. You have to do this in collaboration with others. The German Wolfgang Streeck, there are people in Holland working on it, there are people in Denmark. There are 2 meetings, conferences planned in November, one in Denmark, one in France in December, precisely to discuss creating something that we can then argue with all over Europe. And then we'll see. You say that's utopian? It's less utopian.
But I'm saying we are doing precisely this.
What?
We are doing precisely this. I told you half a year ago
but
that we are staying a constituent
if your
process.
perspective is to wait till there's a progressive government in European countries.
No, it's not the only thing.
But how are you going to change this European Union then? How? Concretely, what are the measures? A, B, C, D, E. How?
Well, I'm not an economist, as you know, but the idea is not only to have progressive governments in Europe. I mean, that would be ridiculous, because it cannot happen. But to have, international perspective, national perspective, and local perspective. What's happening with Ada Colau in Barcelona? She's a supporter, she's a member of DiEM. The Linke is member of DiEM. The Labour Party is member of DiEM. But we are not only relying on political parties, not only relying on progressive governments, which would be a utopia, I think. And at the same time, we are creating a process of a new constituent process in Europe. But it will take time. But I think if you stick to the position that the only solution is to exit, then you're opening the door precisely for the right who will, like you see in Britain today, what's happening in Britain?
The door has already been opened for the right.
Yeah, but it is strengthening them, that's the problem.
No, the door has been opened for the right because the left has kept its mouth shut on all these issues. That's the problem. The right has got the advantage because we stayed quiet. Because, as nice, decent liberals, we thought, or Marxist liberals, or right-wing liberals, we thought that the European Union was a very good thing and we shouldn't attack it. And we're now paying the price everywhere in Europe. And this has nothing to do with Brexit. The people who've taken advantage of the discontent, alienation, anger has been the right, without any doubt. And carrying on in that way by, Ada Colau is a very nice person, but how many times have I heard of using this example and that example and using the Basque Country example for alternative methods? It's really nice to talk about, but in concrete terms it means very little. And the position of Podemos, for instance, is very strongly pro the European Union. So what is going to happen in Spain when this issue comes up? Either they can't do anything. If they do it, they'll be treated like the Greeks were treated. And Iglesias saying that, but we are much bigger than Greece. It's pure arrogance. It's not a question of whether you're bigger than Greece or smaller than Greece. It's who dominates Europe and what is their policy. The only serious thing that could happen, which is not going to happen, would be a big shift in the German elite. They decide, okay, enough is enough. We are not going to do this way anymore. And they're already discussing behind the scenes, we know this, ways of restructuring Europe if there's another crisis. Changing it, making it smaller, ending the veto of the smaller countries. So effectively it becomes a Europe dominated by the Germans, Belgium, the Benelux countries, France, probably Italy, but who knows? So that's the problem. And we'll see. It's pointless arguing anymore because we don't know. That's the answer. No one is sure what's going to happen.
So what would you say to a country like Serbia that is not in the European Union but in a way wants to become a part of the European Union? I will quote Srećko. I love this quote in the preface of the book by Heman Žižek, What Does Europe Want? He said, he was actually quoting Neil Ferguson when he said that Croatia came to the party when all the guests were drunk and all the food was already, the good food was eaten, but Serbia, where will Serbia come? Serbia is coming to the after party. So what kind of after party do you think we will be entering if we enter? And do you think that Serbia will become a part of the European Union, or do you think the European Union will fall apart before this happens?
I don't think it's going to fall apart that quickly, but I don't think it's going to let Serbia in. It might. There's a good case for Serbia to go in because it might fall apart sooner. Because the more you expand it, the more useless this outfit becomes. It would have been much better if 5 or 6 countries had a plan. Let's say even a plan, a limited plan, which some of things we could agree with, like the original plan for a social Europe. They abandoned that. Now it's a complete sort of neoliberalism, and some of the laws they are pushing through the Europeans are just truly disgusting. You saw what happened when they tried to sign this deal with Canada. The Walloon region stopped it for a minute, and then they were brought back into line very quickly. I'm very glad they stopped it. It's a good move. It's excellent. But it didn't take, within 48 hours, they were wrapped on the knuckles. So if Serbian friends have illusions that they're going to be let into the European Union, the Turks have been waiting much longer than you. And I know you're good Christians and all that, but that's not the question here. That's not the question here. The question is, it's related to many things. In the case of Serbia, the politicians are not that different from the Croatian ones, so they could easily do deals, but they don't trust you because they think you're too pro-Russian, there's too many Slavist tendencies, etc., etc. And so they're nervous. They're also nervous about taking any new countries in at the precise moment. And then there's the other aspect of the European Union, which is it's a more recent development, that to be part of the European Union is to be part of NATO. Without any doubt, you push through being part of that. Your armies participate in NATO exercises. The armies of most of the EU countries participate in the global wars waged by the United States empire in different parts of the world. That's the price, which has been paid. Look at the Eastern Europeans and what's happened to them. I mean, they've been involved in all this and have become completely shameless. So don't be too upset if you don't get into the EU. But I would also ask you to be careful of thinking that salvation is going to come from the Gulf states. You're building these huge buildings which are being planned, money is being exchanged, companies have been bribed, no doubt politicians are getting big bribes. I hope they don't send the money to Luxembourg or Panama, but somewhere else this money will go. And then what is going to happen to these big buildings? You wait for another crash and they all collapse. Like even in the Gulf states after the crash, unfinished buildings built, no one living in them, no one working with them, architects paid a huge amount of money who take the money and run away, and workers employed in the most appalling living conditions, immigrant workers, to work and build these buildings. So it seems that politicians and businessmen who carry on like this are well aware of the risks, but they still carry on. They can't see that this sort of system doesn't work. They carry on because they know it doesn't concern the bulk of the population. It's make money quickly. And it will look nice. Who will it look nice for? The bulk of the Serbian people? I don't think so somehow. Or tiny elites who dominate politics today, here and in Croatia and in Slovenia. It's the same business, just with different aspects of it highlighted. That is what is going on. So don't believe any of that nonsense, that this is going to be our salvation. Abu Dhabi or Qatar or someone is going to come and save us. That is not going to save most people. It is going to make a few people very rich, and probably already has. But that's not the way to move forward.
Well, I think we should slowly also open the floor for the audience and for the questions from the audience. And we will continue some of our discussions privately, not whispering in the ear, but also maybe publicly. But since you mentioned NATO, I think the evening would be incomplete without mentioning the US elections. It's definitely the most important elections in the world today. And usually in the mass media, it is Donald Trump who is being demonized. And of course, he's an American version of Berlusconi, even when it comes to sex, but also when it comes to his populism. But On the other side, there is Hillary Clinton. Why is Hillary Clinton dangerous, and why might she be an even worse option than Donald Trump? If she comes to power and everything shows that even with all the WikiLeaks revelations, she's still leading the polls, a bit falling in the last days, but she might become the next US president. What will change? You wrote a book, you published a book under the title Obama Syndrome. Could it be called Hillary Syndrome? And is she worse than Obama, actually?
Well, I'm getting tired of writing books about the American political system. Nothing changes. Let me tell you something. Even if Trump were elected, which is very unlikely, but even if he were elected, the American elite would do what they did to Reagan, which is to surround him with a clever, intelligent Politburo that makes policy and just use Reagan as a figurehead. I mean, Reagan, who Bill Clinton and Obama have talked about as being one of their favorite presidents, by the way, often it would happen that Reagan would arrive in one Latin American country. Let's say he's arrived in Guatemala, and he would think that he was arriving in Venezuela, saying, I'm very glad to be in Caracas, and someone would whisper, you're in Guatemala, Mr. President. Okay, I'm very glad to be in Guatemala. So that's the president America has had, and they loved him because he was a second-rate actor who learnt his lines sometimes, but without his lines he was useless. Trump refuses to learn lines. That's the big difference with him, and he has some strong views. But by and large, they'll bring him under control, because this is not a joke, this country. You know, this is the largest, most powerful imperial power in the world. And they can't allow it to go completely out of control. For the military-industrial establishment, Hillary, and for Wall Street, Hillary is the perfect candidate. She will carry on doing what Obama did, and Obama carried on doing what Bush did. And Bush, remember, who was treated as, you know, we hate Bush, we this. Obama carried on his policies, and Bush thanked him in public, saying, I have no disagreements with President Obama. He's carrying on my policies on every level. I support him. Now, both Obama and Bush are supporting Hillary Clinton because the Bushes have broken with the Republicans because Trump is out of control. He sometimes says things which are not bad, like saying he would cancel the NAFTA deals, which are punishing both the neighboring countries and the United States and the American working class. The biggest support for Trump is amongst white workers. There's no getting away from that, whether we like it or not. Again, because the liberals have failed. Bernie Sanders, who came close to tapping that same thing, and could have, we would have swept the elections, the Democrats destroyed him. So it's not that nothing happened in the United States. The Sanders movement, very similar to Corbyn in Britain, was a movement which grew and grew and grew. I mean, the mass meetings in the American campaign, the primaries campaign, I've never seen before. Yes, an anti-war movement, yeah, but not in American elections. So one can't totally judge the undergrowth by the shenanigans that go on television. I mean, it's been an appalling campaign. I assume they show it on the television networks here, but you know what? It's largely been about sex. Who is a worse serial offender? Who is a worse rapist? Who gropes more women? Trump or Hillary's husband and former President Bill Clinton? Women have been paraded in the television studios. It's shocking for the Americans, actually, that this is happening, because, you know, their self-esteem suffers as a result, and the whole world is laughing. But underneath it, what it shows is a very real decline in the political class in the United States. You know, lots of the most intelligent people are not going into politics. Where are they going? They're going into hedge funding, Wall Street, or joining the army. The US Marines have a layer of officers, I was told, who are much, much cleverer than any politician. And that's interesting in terms of the structures of that country too. what is going to happen. So the Trump-Clinton show will come to an end on November the 8th, and then we will see what happens. You know, with Trump it would be unpredictable, with Hillary it would be totally predictable, as we see. And the fact that the FBI, you know, which is not some conspiracy theorist organization, has been forced to investigate these emails sent from her to a private computer, shared private computer. I mean, I don't think it's going to lose her the election, but it's created a real scandal, because this is the first time that the United States, if they elect Hillary, will be electing as president a politician who they know is a liar, who is corrupt. We know all the Clinton Foundation, where the money comes from. It's been made public. Who is a warmonger, who told lies about Libya, and who said something which, if any other politician had done in a country where which the US don't like, they would have said this is war criminal talk. That after Gaddafi was lynched in the most brutal fashion, which I don't even want to describe, in Libya, Hillary Clinton's comment, you can see it on YouTube, just type it out, Hillary Clinton comment on Gaddafi's death. We came, we saw, he died. Total and complete contempt for human beings. Even if it had not, you don't say this about anyone who has been lynched, without any attempt at a trial or any pretense of a trial. This is the sort of person she is. And I think the world will not be a safe place with her in command, because she knows what she wants to do. She wants to impose American authority as much as she can. And if they carry on with these games, in Europe, for instance, where they're provoking the Russians, I'm not a great fan of Putin's, by the way, but I think there's no doubt in this case that the NATO and the Americans have been provoking him, trying to make him make more and more and more false moves. Why? Because after the collapse, he's the first leader, whatever you think of him, who is defending Russian sovereignty and Russian national interests. We may not like these interests, but he sees them himself. He's basically doing what America does. And for that, they can't forgive him, because this sort of politician they thought they'd remove from the world forever. And here's someone who's saying, no, you can't determine it. You want to topple the Assad regime, we're going to help them. Let's see what you're going to do about it. That is the problem, and it's a dangerous situation. I don't believe, like John Pilger, that we're on the eve of World War III, but some of the things that are happening are quite frightening, which is why a strong, independent Europe could have played a big role in stopping this even, but they don't.
Yes, I think this is a perfect time for the audience questions. Can we have a little bit more light in the audience?
More light, and I suggest we take more questions in several rounds. It will be easier than... So we take 3 questions for the beginning, I suggest.
Whatever. The first one always takes a long time.
Yeah, but that's precisely why we want
Do we
more.
have a microphone, or do we have to give the microphone? Okay.
Hands over there. We have imamo simultani prijevod, tako da možete I na... Čuje se alien.
Hello everyone. I perceive people as being mostly observant.
I can't hear you.
Now?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. I perceive people as mostly observant.
Talk into the mic, my friend.
Okay.
Yeah.
As mostly observers, I perceive people, they're just looking and waiting to see what elite is doing. How we're going to wake up people from this apathy? Are people too institutionalized, too dependent on the system? How can we change education? elevate the level of conscience in people, and what can we learn from the Scandinavian educational system? Thank you.
Okay, shall we take a bit more? Yep.
Maybe one more.
Može odmah ono pitanje koje je iza, pošto ste blizu, pa ćemo ta dva onda.
Hvala. Čini se da je danas, kada je sloboda izbora svedena...
Just a second, we will need a translation. Do you know, Maja, how this functions?
I have no idea.
Come on, you're...
Is there a chance in English or not?
No, there is no sound here. Can you... Pa dobro, dajte vi na srpskog, pa ću ja probat prevesti na engleski.
Someone you can translate.
I'll try to translate, yeah. And censor it, right?
Da, na konto one početne priče o revizionizmu, čini se da nam je danas prošlost postala jednako neizvesna kao i budućnost. A što se tiče ove priče o američkim predsjedničkim izborima, čini se da bi se moglo reći da danas, kada je sloboda izbora svedena na biranje između istovetnog, biranje između Hillary Clinton i Donalda Trumpa je kao biranje između dva jazavca koji dolaze iz istog brega, kako je to volio da kaže drug Mao, odnosno kao biranje između Coca-Cola i Pepsi-Cola, da upotrebim savremenu terminologiju. Pitanje bi se zapravo odnosilo na jednog značajnog mislioca koji dolazi iz istočnog, odnosno islamskog kulturnog prostora, o kojem gospodin Ali voli da govori, a to je Averroes, odnosno Ibn Ruždi. Jer danas, kada je preovladala...
Rekli ste Averroes ili...
Da.
Ok.
Danas, kada je preovladala ona...
Možete malo kraće, ja ovo neću moći prevesti.
Da.
Molim vas. Ali što je bilo pitanje na kraju?
Da, pa evo, to je pitanje. Dakle, danas kada je prevladala ona Badiouova krilatica postani kao ja i poštovaću tvoju razliku, mislim da je značajno govoriti o nekim misliocima kao što je Averroes, o kojem inače gospodin Ali rado govorio, jer oni zapravo narušavaju uvrežene predstave o istočnom kulturnom prostoru. Toliko, hvala.
Okay, hvala. So I didn't find the question mark in the question, but he said that the choice between Hillary and Trump is basically, to quote Mao, a choice between Pepsi and Coca-Cola, and that for him, for you, Averroes seems as someone who had some inspirational ideas. But I'm sorry I didn't get the question because I think it was a comment. So if I might ask for the rest of the audience also to pose more questions, that would be good. So let's take another question.
There's someone right at the back.
Evo, pitanje tamo na sredini, ako može mikrofon nekako doplutati tamo. So, okay, the first one was about education and apathy and the Scandinavian model as a possible inspiration. The second one mainly on maybe a comment on Averroes, because I know he was important to you as well. And the third one is the following.
I have a question. I don't know how much you know about the situation in the Arctic and the cooperation between Arctic nations and the world that is happening.
Could you speak into the
If you know about the Arctic cooperation that is happening between the Arctic nations, if you know anything about that situation, if you do, if you could comment on it.
Well, what situation?
What situation?
The Arctic cooperation between the Arctic nations.
Arctic?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Thank you.
Let me deal with the questions in turn. To the first question, I would say that everyone asks this question, or what should we do, how should we wake people up? And it's good that the question is asked, but there are no easy answers. The thing is this, that sometimes mass movements erupt without any warning. And people are completely surprised when they erupt because they think everyone was asleep. And suddenly it emerges that whatever has caused the mass movement has angered people so much that even if they were asleep, they've woken up and they're on the streets and they're marching. Or whatever, they're doing something. And these mass movements can start here and go up and up and up and up. But if at the end of this movement there's no solution to be found, and the choice is either banging your head against a wall or the police banging your head with a baton, people go down, consciousness goes down, and then you have to wait for the next time, unless there is a political movement or a political force which people feel is on their side, which they can join, and then they can move forward. I give you an example which is very unusual. We were discussing it in Zagreb yesterday. When Jeremy Corbyn was elected leader of the Labour Party, the only reason that happened is because of some remarks he made in the leadership debate on television, and young people watching it had not heard these demands before. Very simple demands: free higher education, defend the National Health Service. And they said there's some crazy politician out there who's making these wild demands, but these demands should have been part and parcel of their history classes. So more and more people began to come to his meetings. They got larger and larger, and because the Labour Party permitted it, they could pay, at that time, £5 and join the Labour Party to vote in the election, because the leaders who proposed this rule thought that any outsiders joining the Labour Party would automatically be right-wing people on our side. In fact, they turned out to be largely people who had no political home at all, and the membership of the Labour Party now is 500,000. It's the largest political party in Europe. Now, there are very few people like Corbyn or parties like that party with its structures at the moment, but there's no reason why there shouldn't be new parties and new movements, and in that case something can happen. But for these things to happen, you can't prepare. All you can prepare is something which provides a home, an umbrella underneath which they can all work and move forward. That's the only way I can think of at the present moment, of making sure that all the effort that goes into creating a mass movement and the anger and the debates and the discussions doesn't get lost. You know, with most of the occupation, you can see the wonderful student movement in Croatia, which took place several years ago, came soon after that. We talked about it. Wonderful. Where is it now? Not all of them have disappeared. Some of them have launched alternative newspapers, some have launched alternative websites, so you always preserve something. But the mass side of it begins to disappear. Or the very good people in this city who have been demonstrating and protesting against this new vulgar kitsch plan to transform the Belgrade riverside. I hope they don't disappear too soon, because this is going to be a long project. And you have to settle down for a long time when you do these things. That's the only point. The second question was what, Srećko?
About Averroes.
What about Averroes?
Well, I don't know.
Well, Averroes was, for those who don't know, was a Latin. This is the Latin name, Averroes, which was given to him, and he was an Andalusian philosopher in Muslim Spain in the middle medieval period, and his real name was Ibn Rushd. And he was a philosopher who first raised the question within philosophy, especially in the Islamic world, but not exclusively there, of differentiating two things. And he did it in a clever way, because, you had to be careful how you spoke whenever you had religions in charge, whatever the religion. And Ibn Rushd, Averroes, said, in order to start a debate in Cordoba, he said there are two ways of looking at things. One is divine truth, in other words, the truth given by the Old Testament, the New Testament, the Quran. And he said, well, it has its place. But then there is reason. So in a very sharp way, he differentiated between divine truth, so-called, and reason, making it clear that they were not the same thing, that divine truth wasn't reason. And this started a whole debate with the philosophy school in Baghdad. This was in the 13th or late 12th century. And Ibn Rushd also was the main philosopher in early Europe who made sure that the works of Aristotle were translated first into Arabic and from Arabic into Latin, and that's how they were preserved. A lot of the ancient Greek works were preserved by the school of translators in Toledo, Tulaytullah, during Islamic Spain, in which they translated everything and kept it, and that is what fueled the Renaissance. And the other thing Ibn Rushd also raised, and I think in this he was the first to raise it, he raised in his political philosophy the question of women, which very few people know about because we only have a few fragments from his writing. And in this he said, how can a society which ignores 50% of its population, at that time there was no question of elections, and prevents these from taking place, women participating in politics and power, how can such a society move forward? He said, this question is beginning to puzzle me. And this question is still puzzling some people. And this question certainly puzzled people since the beginning of the 20th century, where it wasn't until after the First World War that women got the right to vote. And interestingly enough, had a constitution been passed in Afghanistan in 1919, Afghan women would have got the right to vote before any woman in Europe. And the British crushed that movement. So it's interesting to look at it from that point of view. And the third one, you couldn't remember.
No, I'm sorry, I couldn't understand
what?
it really.
The Arctic situation. Sorry, how could I forget this? To be totally frank and honest with you, I do not know. I have not studied it. I know there have been some texts written on it. I know that the native people in those regions have their own particular view. The big dispute is which big powers will exploit the Arctic resources. Is it possible to safeguard these resources via the UN? I mean, my view is if you expect the UN to do anything useful, forget it. It has to be an agreement between the 6 or 7 large industrial powers, the OECD, and so far they have shown no respect whatsoever for nature and the needs of the planet. So I think they will probably succeed and there will be good movements against it. That's all I know so far. So I have no concrete details for you.
Okay, thanks. I think we are ready for the second round.
Yeah, we have the second round of questions. So we have 2, 3, 4 questions here. Okay, so let's start with the question. Okay, and after that, balcony, we promise. So after that, we're going to the balcony. So here I see in the second row, excuse me, here in the second row.
That's better.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
I didn't want to ask you this question, but when...
Could you speak into the mic?
Okay, sorry. I didn't want to ask you this question, but when Srećko Horvat and you already mentioned historical revisionism, then I have to ask you this question, and it's about the fact that you stood up in the defense of the Diana Johnston book, The Full Crusade, that is written, and which is the blatant example of denial of Srebrenica genocide. And beside that, it's a book which is from the perspective of historiography, full of, we can say, rubbish. And what do you feel about that book today, and what is your stance about that book today?
I don't quite know. Sorry. What are you talking about? Just explain to me.
Diana Johnston book,
Yes.
Full Crusade.
Which book?
Full Crusade. Diana Johnston book, the Sweden, when they refused to publish that book in 2003, with Noam Chomsky, you wrote a letter in defense of that book, and you said that it's an outstanding book. And that book is really, and Jasmin Vujanović on your website, New Left Review, wrote a very good piece in which he, literally destroyed that book and everything which is written in that book. But you wrote that letter with Mr. Chomsky and defended that book.
Well, look, the question of the Diane Johnson book was this. Neither Noam Chomsky nor I agreed with it. That was not the question. The question was whether a book which challenges something which is very widespread should be published or not. I am, in general, not in favor of banning books, including books I disagree with very strongly. And what I disliked about that whole business was that some people in Bosnia in particular, who should have known better, used the fact that Noam and I signed a letter saying that the Swedish publishing house shouldn't ban a book which they had already accepted simply because a lobby has raised a big fight against it. For that we were accused of denying that there had been a massacre in Srebrenica. That's disgusting.
I'm sorry, I have to say it.
No, put the mic, man, if you want to argue with me. Yeah.
But there is a letter. I'm not aware. I don't know if you are aware that there is a letter that there is a signature of yours and Mr. Chomsky,
but the signature,
in which you say that it is an outstanding book. So you should know what you signed.
Yeah, but Tariq never denied the massacre in Srebrenica.
Okay, doesn't matter. I'm just asking about the signature, nothing more. I'm not saying that he's denying the genocide. I'm asking, is he aware what he signed? Nothing more.
Well,
because the letter, there is a letter. You can find it on online or everywhere you want. So that's the...
Well, I signed a letter. I have to be honest, I don't remember everything that was in it, but I would never have signed a letter which supported all the claims in the book. And I get very tired and fed up of this, that you have powerful lobbies which become very dominant. It happens today as well, and where people you disagree with are told you can't come on the platform because we disagree with you. It's better always to argue with people. That's been a strong principle in my entire political life. All my life I've argued with people. Srećko, this is a friendly argument today, but I've argued with people I disagree with fundamentally on many issues, including Islamic fundamentalists when they wanted to kill Rushdie for writing satanic verses. I had a public debate with them in Edinburgh. So that's my position. I don't think that banning things actually helps. It's better if you challenge these people. And that applies to, Noam's position is very, very principled on that, Don't ban books. Because once you start doing that, who determines what is banned and when it's banned? And if you look at the tragedies that took place during the Yugoslav Civil War, without ever questioning the massacre in Srebrenica, why should I do that? I felt very warm towards the victims in Bosnia, as I did, and this people don't like. When I used to say it, I feel as warmly to the victims of the siege in Sarajevo and the people who were massacred in Srebrenica as the people who were hounded out and beaten and invaded and bombed in the Krajina. That they don't like because it doesn't fit in with the overall pattern of how the dominant ideology works. It was a brutal civil war. All sides committed atrocities, including the Bosnians, on certain occasions. We have to accept it. More interesting is to, for the history of this area, is to discuss the question whether that civil war was necessary. Who wanted to break up Yugoslavia? Why? Was it a big triumph? For who? Oskar Lafontaine, the German finance minister at the time, afterwards said publicly, and again recently, Germany bears a huge responsibility for pushing that conflict when we could have done the opposite and restrained it. For me, the big thing about that civil war was that if the European Union, and Germany in particular, but not just Germany, Britain, France, had wanted to stop it, all they needed to do was to call the entire leadership of the Yugoslavia before it collapsed, and offer $1 billion to rebuild the country, to pay the army, to stop this thing from happening. But everyone was obsessed with their own particular things that they liked. You know, the Germans in Croatia and Slovenia, the British to a certain extent in Serbia, and finally the Americans in Bosnia. And we are living through that result now.
Can we have a balcony question?
Hello.
Hi.
We are living in pessimistic times, as you've put out for the speech. But as someone who's organized within the revolutionary left for a long time, I think you'd appreciate. I think you'd probably have some optimism in you left. I mean, what about you've painted a very horrid picture of America, but what about the Black Lives Matter movement? What about the fact that socialism, a word that wasn't spoken for 60 years and was a completely taboo theme, is now mainstream again, and Hillary Clinton has to portray herself as a feminist? What about the Chicago teachers' strike that immobilized the entire city for a day? What about the Verizon strike? What about the power of organized workers, as in France over this year, to fight back against an austerity labor law and keep their quite generous working conditions when it comes to hours and other things? Even in the hell that is US politics, I think we can see that there is still a potential for a fight back. And as you've said, I mean, these formations have to come up. But we've seen different times in history when there was nothing on the left parliamentarily. We've seen different times in history when things have looked a lot worse. I mean, for example, the 50s across the West. But surely things can change. Surely things are better right now than they were, say, in the 50s in America and England.
Well, I mean, things have changed, certainly, since the 50s, of course. Because between the 50s and now you had, from 65 to 1975, a whole decade of pre-revolutionary protests all over the globe. And that is what changed it. But I'm talking about now. And, you know, we know what that movement achieved. Actually, many of the political gains of that movement have been lost. But the gains on sexual politics survived. The women's liberation movement, though the people who struggled for it and called it a women's liberation movement were inspired by the Vietnamese struggle for national liberation. The gay liberation movement, likewise. Today, even that has been, if you want me to be honest, bourgeoisified, with bourgeois feminism very strong, liberal feminism very strong, hence people who are prepared to overlook Hillary's politics because she's a woman, or who are prepared to overlook Obama's politics because he was black. The strength of identity politics was revealed in these instances as well. It's got nothing that much to do with socialism, but it's better than what existed in the 50s. I agree with you. What I'm pointing, by the way, I spent some time in saying that the movement in the United States for Sanders was a major breakthrough. It's good he used the word socialism, though we shouldn't have too many illusions what he meant by it. But he did use it, and to be used that word in the United States is very positive. I agree. But, you know, that's one thing, the rise of a sort of semi-political insurrection took place in the United States. But if I read the figures correctly, over 80% of those who participated in that campaign are now going to vote for Hillary. So there are some problems with that, and largely because nothing exists outside this wretched two-party setup which people can feel like joining. I mean, the far-left groups do good work, but they are tiny. One can't pretend otherwise. And the Chicago teachers' strike is great, but there have been strikes like that all over the world, all over Europe You know, that on its own doesn't get you anywhere. It's got to be done, and we defend and fight for it. But it doesn't on its own change the situation. I mean, you know, one could talk about the victory of Savant in Seattle as a counselor, also positive. I said all the small things going on that move things forward a bit, we support. But one can't just use this fact to pretend that the situation is better than it is. Overall, on virtually every continent today, despite these things happening, and despite movement in the undergrowth, we are living in a period of defeat. The enemy, if I can put it that way, is very strong and very powerful. And it's going to take a long time to defeat it. And I'm not saying we shouldn't aim for that. Of course we should. But, you know, it's not a question of losing hope. I never lose hope. But it's a question of what the French novelist once said, you know, pessimism of the intellect and optimism of the will. It wasn't Gramsci who said that, he pinched it from the French novelist Romain Rolland. But it's a correct thing to say. It's absolutely right. And sometimes, you know, when you work just in a tiny group of leftists, especially good leftists, for whatever denomination, that world dominates your way of thinking, and you sometimes forget, I've seen it many a time over the last 50 years, the global realities of what is happening in different parts of the world. I could say to you that one of the things we had in the 60s in the United States was a huge and powerful anti-war movement that played a big part in ending the war in Vietnam, because it was a conscript war, fought by conscripts, so anyone could be drafted, and that forced people to study, what the hell are we going to fight? Today you have wars fought by volunteer armies and mercenaries, corporate mercenaries. So you don't have an anti-war movement in the United States at all, when the United States is wreaking havoc in different parts of the world. There are 7 wars going on at the moment being fought by Obama. Not a single big demonstration, or even a small one, against what this government is doing. And you know, if one is being an internationalist, one has to think of the world as a whole. And here the American citizens have a special responsibility, because they live in an imperialist country. They're at the heart of it. And so their responsibility is even bigger than that of the Europeans who go along with it. That's all I'm saying.
Well, I can see many questions, but I have seen the mic is already on the balcony. And I suggest, I mean, I know there are many questions, but it's a bit late.
Yeah, we can talk.
Okay, I'll try to be quick then. No, the one question that kind of constantly was popping up during the Greek crisis, and well, during 2015 basically, and then throughout the 2016 and the Brexit thing, was the question of alternatives. So what do you do if you exit EU, if you exit the Eurozone? Are you left alone, feeling isolated and poor and sad, or do you go to turn yourself to Russia and then try and build some alternative alliance with some alternative imperialist force? So that question kind of remained open in my opinion, and us on the Balkans have been kind of struggling with this issue for some time now. So it's always been this kind of politics of what you perceive as being the lesser evil. So you're either pro-EU or you're pro-Russia. But for centuries, basically, now we've been in a situation where we are like small divided nations trying to find some sort of a sponsor in one or the other imperialist force, and then playing that kind of a game. Now this have pushed some of the revolutionaries on the Balkans throughout the history to build the idea of the Balkan Socialist Federation as an attempt to formulate an answer, a practical answer through struggle
against both the nationalist local elites and the imperialisms. Now, could that be some kind of an idea that could actually be good for thinking of what could be the alternative for the current EU situation?
Thanks a lot, and I think we should also finish by this question. Although there are questions, I know, but it's something which you have been advocating for years, right?
You know, the idea of a Balkan Federation is very close to my heart. It has been for a long, long time, and not just the ex-Yugoslavia, but also Greece, also Bulgaria. And in fact, I think one serious way of rebuilding the European Union would be by strengthening the regions, so that you don't have the European bureaucracy that can move in and crush Croatia or Slovenia or one country, but when they decide to do that, if they do that, then you have not just Greece fighting back, but Greece and the other 4 or 5 countries, part of that regional alliance, confederation, whatever you want to call it, who then they know they have to take on, and the same can be done for the Mediterranean world, Spain, Italy, Cyprus, etc. And I think that that would also enhance democracy inside the European Union by having a concrete project. No, we are not going to trust you, the European bureaucrats, with doing this and just accepting the advice of the big nations. We're going to do it ourselves, and this is what our demands, and we are not going to let you crush A, B, C, or D. Also, the big debate, or not a debate, but half hope, half sentiment that maybe one day Yugoslavia will become as it was. That's not going to happen. Let's be realistic. But what could happen is the emergence of a new region here. And the same thing can happen in Northern Europe, They shouldn't be denied that. The Scandinavians and Scotland and Ireland and these countries can have a bloc. And then the Germans will have to choose what to do. I mean, they will probably stick with the Benelux countries and Holland, but it would be a much better way forward. You have 4 entities, and how they function and how they consult each other can also enhance democracy. But it's not a problem with me. I've been in favor of a Balkan Federation for a long, long time.
Okay, so thanks a lot, guys. And thank you all for coming here and for the questions, and see you next time.